I found my fiancé stealing from my charity. I returned for revenge and shattered his web of lies. The sound of church bells echoed through the misty morning air as I stood at the edge of Millbrook Cemetery, staring at my own gravestone. Elena Vasquez, beloved daughter and fiancé, taken too soon. The marble gleamed fresh and white, adorned with pink roses that someone had placed there just this morning. How thoughtful of them to visit my grave on what was supposed to be my wedding day. Except I wasn't dead. My fingers traced the cold stone, feeling the sharp edges of letters that proclaimed my demise to the world. 6 months ago, I was supposed to marry Marcus Chen, the man I'd loved since college. 6 months ago, I discovered he'd been embezzling from the children's charity I founded. 6 months ago, when I confronted him with the evidence, he tried to kill me, and almost succeeded. The morning fog swirled around my ankles as I walked through the cemetery gates, my heels clicking softly on the wet pavement. In 3 hours, Marcus would be standing at the altar of St. Augustine's Cathedral, promising to love and cherish another woman. The same cathedral where we'd planned our own wedding, the same cathedral where my memorial service had been held while I lay in a medically induced coma, fighting for my life in a Swiss clinic. My reflection in a shop window still startled me sometimes. The surgeons in Geneva had done remarkable work reconstructing my face after the accident. That's what the police reports called it, a tragic fall down the stairs of our shared apartment. No witnesses, just Marcus's tearful testimony about finding me broken and bleeding. His frantic 911 call played for sympathetic jurors who never questioned why a healthy 28-year-old woman would simply tumble to her death. But plastic surgery hadn't just saved my life. It had given me a new one. Dr. Morgan Stern had rebuilt me with subtle changes, a slightly different nose, altered cheekbones, eyes that tilted differently. I looked like Elena Vasquez's younger sister, similar enough to be familiar, but different enough to pass unrecognized. Combined with my new auburn hair and the year I'd spent dead to the world, I'd become the perfect ghost. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus was marrying my replacement today, Sophia Winters, the charity's former board member who'd consoled him through his grief. She'd stepped seamlessly into my role, taking over the foundation I'd built from nothing, accepting sympathy as the woman who'd helped Marcus heal from his devastating loss. I wondered if she knew how closely she resembled me, the same height, similar build, even the same preference for vintage jewelry. Marcus always did have a type. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Reyes, my physical therapist in Switzerland. "How are you feeling today? Remember what we discussed about closure?" I almost laughed. Closure? That's what everyone had prescribed for my trauma. Therapy, meditation, moving on. They didn't understand that some wounds don't heal until justice is served, and Marcus Chen was about to discover that some ghosts don't rest in peace. The Swiss investigators had been thorough. While Marcus thought me safely buried, I'd been recovering and planning, building an airtight case with the help of forensic accountants and private investigators. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been systematically draining funds from Hope's Haven, the charity I'd founded to help homeless children. He'd hidden his theft behind fake invoices, shell companies, and forged documents. When I discovered his embezzlement, he'd chosen murder over accountability. The trial would come later. Today was about something more primal, the look in his eyes when he realized his victim had returned from the dead. I checked my watch. 11:30 a.m. The wedding ceremony began at 2 p.m., which gave me time for one final preparation. From my rental car, I retrieved a garment bag containing the centerpiece of my plan, a white dress. Not a wedding dress, but something close enough to send a very specific message. The fabric was silk, the cut elegant but simple, the color of pristine white that would stand out against the cathedral's dark wood and stained glass. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. In the car's rearview mirror, I applied my makeup with surgical precision, red lipstick, the exact shade I'd worn the night Marcus tried to kill me, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, the ones Marcus thought were buried with me. Each detail was chosen to maximize psychological impact. My hands remained steady as I worked, the trembling that had plagued me for months after the accident had finally stopped. Physical therapy had restored my coordination, but it was something deeper that steadied me now. Purpose. For 6 months, I'd existed in limbo between life and death. Today, I would reclaim both. The cathedral's Gothic spires came into view as I drove through downtown. Media vans lined the street. Apparently, The inspiring love story of Marcus Chen and Sophia Winters had captured public attention, the grieving man finding love again, the compassionate woman helping him heal, their fairy tale wedding in the same church where they'd mourned his lost fiancé. The press loved a good redemption narrative. They were about to get a much better story. I parked 3 blocks away and walked toward the cathedral, my white dress flowing in the autumn breeze. Wedding guests were arriving in expensive cars, their faces bright with anticipation. I recognized many of them, colleagues from the charity, Marcus's family, friends who'd sent flowers to my funeral. They'd all believed the lie so completely, mourning me while celebrating my would-be murderer. Through the cathedral's open doors, I could see the decorations, white roses and baby's breath, the same flowers that adorned my fake grave. Marcus had always been sentimental in his cruelty. I found a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the cathedral entrance. The barista, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled as she took my order. "You look beautiful," she said, admiring my dress. "Are you going to the wedding?" "In a way," I replied, accepting my cup with hands that no longer shook. "I'm delivering a message." The clock on the coffee shop wall read 1:45 p.m. Guests were filing into the cathedral now, their chatter carrying across the street. I could see Marcus's groomsmen gathering near the altar through the open doors, their tuxedos sharp and formal. Everything was proceeding according to plan, Marcus's plan. But he'd made one critical error in his calculations. He'd assumed that pushing someone down a flight of stairs would be enough to keep them quiet permanently. He'd underestimated the power of a woman who'd built a charity from nothing, who survived being orphaned at 16, who'd fought for every success in her life. He'd underestimated me. At 1:58 p.m., I stood up from my table, smoothed my white dress, and walked toward the cathedral. The wedding guests were all seated now, the doors beginning to close for the ceremony. I could hear the opening notes of the processional music drifting across the plaza. My reflection in the cathedral's bronze doors showed a woman transformed, not just by surgery, but by purpose. Elena Vasquez had been naive enough to trust the man who'd tried to destroy her. The woman walking into this church was something else entirely, justice in a white dress, truth in human form, a ghost who'd come to collect what was owed. The heavy doors swung open silently as I stepped inside. The cathedral was packed, every pew filled with people who'd mourned my death and celebrated my killer's new beginning. At the altar, Marcus stood resplendent in his black tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness as he waited for his bride. He looked exactly the same, dark hair, perfectly styled, confident smile, the charming demeanor that had once made me believe I was the luckiest woman alive. The same hands that had held me were the ones that had pushed me. The same lips that had whispered "I love you" had lied to police about finding my body. The processional music swelled as Sophia appeared at the back of the cathedral in her flowing white gown. She was beautiful, radiant, every inch the perfect bride. Marcus's face lit up as he saw her, his eyes bright with what looked like genuine love. Perhaps he'd even convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that killing me had been necessary for his greater good. I took a seat in the back pew, my white dress blending with the other wedding guests' formal attire. No one looked at me twice, just another well-dressed woman attending a society wedding. I was invisible in plain sight, a ghost among the living. The ceremony proceeded with clockwork precision. Sophia glided down the aisle like a princess in a fairy tale, her smile radiant as she approached the altar. Marcus took her hand with the same tender gesture he'd once used with me. His voice was strong and clear as he spoke his vows about eternal love and unwavering commitment. The pastor's voice echoed through the cathedral as he reached the traditional moment every wedding guest anticipated. "If anyone present knows of any lawful impediment why these two persons may not be joined together in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The cathedral fell silent. 300 guests held their breath, following the ancient ritual that no one ever actually interrupted. Marcus smiled confidently, squeezing Sophia's hand as they waited for the formality to pass. And that's when I stood up. The rustle of my white dress against the wooden pew seemed to echo through the cathedral like thunder. Heads began to turn as I stepped into the aisle, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each measured step toward the altar. Marcus's smile faltered as he noticed the disturbance. His eyes found mine across the sea of wedding guests, and I watched his face transform from confusion to recognition to absolute terror. The color drained from his cheeks as our eyes met. His mouth opened slightly, as if he were seeing an actual ghost, which, in a sense, he was. "I object," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the cathedral. But I didn't stop there. I had 6 months of words to say, 6 months of truth to tell, and a captive audience of 300 witnesses. "I object," I repeated, continuing my walk down the aisle, "because the groom is already married to murder." The silence that followed my words was deafening. 300 wedding guests sat frozen in their pews, their faces a mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning recognition. The organist's hands had stilled on the keys, leaving only the sound of my footsteps echoing through the cathedral as I continued my deliberate march toward the altar. Marcus's best man, David Kim, stepped forward protectively. "Security," he called out, his voice cracking with uncertainty. There's no one," I interrupted smoothly, never breaking stride. "I'm Elena Vasquez. You remember me, don't you, David? You gave a beautiful eulogy at my funeral." David's face went white as recognition hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, nearly colliding with the other groomsmen, who were staring at me as if I'd materialized from thin air. Behind me, the cathedral erupted in chaos. Guests were rising from their seats, pointing, whispering frantically to each other. Camera phones appeared as people tried to capture what they were witnessing. The bride's mother, a distinguished woman in royal blue, had fainted into her husband's arms. But my focus remained on Marcus. He stood paralyzed at the altar, his face cycling through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope: terror, disbelief, rage, and something that might have been relief. His mouth moved soundlessly, as if he were trying to speak but had forgotten how to form words. Sophia, resplendent in her wedding gown, looked between Marcus and me with growing horror. "Marcus," she whispered, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Marcus, who is this woman? Why does she look like—" "Because I am," I said, stopping just 10 feet from the altar, close enough that Marcus could see every detail of my reconstructed face, could recognize the eyes that had looked at him with love the night he tried to murder me. "I'm Elena Vasquez, Marcus's supposedly dead fiancé, the woman whose charity you've been running, Sophia, the woman whose grave you've been visiting." The pastor, an elderly man named Father Morrison, who had known me since childhood, dropped his Bible. The leather-bound book hit the marble floor with a sharp crack that seemed to break the spell holding everyone frozen. "Elena," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "But child, we buried you. I performed the service myself." "You buried an empty coffin, Father," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. While everyone mourned my death, I was in a Swiss hospital, learning to walk again after my loving fiancé pushed me down a flight of stairs. The cathedral exploded into noise, shouts of confusion, gasps of horror, the scraping of wooden pews as people stood for a better view. Someone was crying. Several someones. I could hear Marcus's mother, Catherine, wailing somewhere behind me. "That's impossible." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You died. I saw you die. I held you." "You pushed me." I cut him off, my voice rising to carry over the chaos. "You discovered I'd found your embezzlement scheme and you tried to kill me. The only thing that saved my life was Dr. Sarah Martinez next door, who heard the crash and called 911 before you could finish the job." Marcus's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Richard Hawley who'd handled the estate proceedings, was pushing through the crowd toward the altar. "This is clearly some kind of sick impersonation," he announced loudly. "Elena Vasquez is dead. I have the death certificate." "Forged," I said calmly, reaching into my small purse. "Along with most of the documents you filed, Richard." Dr. Martinez suspected foul play from the beginning. She kept tissue samples, documented my injuries, questioned the inconsistencies in Marcus's story. When I woke up 3 weeks later, she helped me disappear while we built our case. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a medical report bearing Dr. Martinez's signature and the letterhead of Geneva Memorial Hospital. This is my real medical record, the one showing I survived with severe injuries consistent with being pushed downstairs, not accidentally falling. David Kim grabbed Marcus's arm. "Dude, we need to get you out of here. This is insane." "Don't touch him," I said sharply, and something in my voice made David freeze. "Marcus isn't going anywhere. Neither are any of you who helped cover this up." Sophia was backing away from Marcus now, her wedding dress rustling against the marble steps. I don't understand, she said, her voice rising toward hysteria. Marcus told me Elena had an accident. He was devastated. He grieved for months. He grieved for his freedom, I corrected. Marcus has been stealing from Hope's Haven for 2 years, over $3 million meant for homeless children, funneled through fake vendors and inflated contracts. When I discovered his scheme, he decided murder was easier than accountability. The cathedral's heavy doors burst open as several figures in dark suits entered. I recognized Detective Ray Kowalski immediately, tall, graying, with the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much. Behind him came Dr. Martinez, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun, her medical bag in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. "Nobody leaves," Detective Kowalski announced, his voice booming through the chaos. "This is now a crime scene." Marcus made a desperate break for the side exit, but 2 more officers emerged from behind the altar, blocking his path. He spun around wildly, looking for another escape route, but found himself surrounded. "Marcus Chen," Detective Kowalski continued, pulling out handcuffs, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, embezzlement, insurance fraud, and falsifying official documents." "This is a setup," Marcus shouted, his composed facade finally cracking completely. "She's not Elena. Elena is dead. I buried her. I mourned her." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, opening her medical bag. "I'll need to take DNA samples to confirm identity," she announced, though I'd recognize my patient anywhere. "Elena, may I?" I nodded, extending my hand. Dr. Martinez pricked my finger with a sterile lancet, collecting the blood sample in a small vial. The simple action seemed to convince the remaining skeptics. This wasn't some elaborate hoax or look-alike. This was scientific verification. Sophia had sunk onto the altar steps, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "Marcus," she whispered, staring up at him with eyes full of betrayal. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" "Sophia, listen to me," Marcus said frantically, trying to approach her despite the officers flanking him. "She's lying. This is some kind of revenge fantasy." Elena was always jealous, always suspicious. "Show them the recordings," I said to Dr. Martinez. The doctor pulled a small digital device from her folder. Elena's apartment was equipped with security cameras, she announced. The police initially dismissed the footage as corrupted, but our Swiss technicians were able to recover it. On the device's screen, grainy security footage began to play. The timestamp showed the night of my accident, 6 months ago, 11:47 p.m. The video showed Marcus and me arguing in my apartment's living room. Even without sound, his aggressive body language was unmistakable. The cathedral fell silent as everyone strained to see the small screen. Dr. Martinez held it high, and someone with a smartphone began live streaming the footage to social media. Within seconds, the video would be circulating worldwide. On screen, the argument escalated. Marcus grabbed my shoulders, shook me violently. I pulled away, heading for the stairs. He followed, and the camera angle showed him reaching out, not to steady me, but to push. The footage captured my fall in horrifying detail, my body tumbling down the hardwood stairs, my head striking the banister, my motionless form crumpled at the bottom. Then Marcus checking to see if I was breathing, his face showing not grief but calculation. Several wedding guests were openly weeping now. Marcus's mother had collapsed into a pew, her husband supporting her with shaking hands. The groomsmen were backing away from Marcus as if he'd become radioactive. "That footage is fabricated," Marcus said desperately, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's been doctored. Any expert can—" "We've had 6 months of experts examine it," Detective Kowalski interrupted, snapping the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists, "along with the financial forensics team who traced your embezzlement scheme. Did you really think you could steal $3 million without leaving a trail?" Richard Hawley, the lawyer, was edging toward the exit. "Detective," I called out, "you might want to arrest Mr. Hawley as well. He's the one who filed the fraudulent death certificate and handled the life insurance claims." Hawley broke into a run, but 2 officers were waiting by the doors. As they tackled him, papers scattered from his briefcase, insurance documents, forged medical reports, bank records showing suspicious transfers. The chaos in the cathedral was reaching a crescendo. Wedding guests were filming everything, calling friends and family, trying to process what they were witnessing. Some were attempting to leave, but officers were stationed at every exit, checking IDs and taking contact information. Through it all, I stood calmly in my white dress, watching justice finally unfold. The woman who had died 6 months ago was witnessing the resurrection of truth. Father Morrison approached me cautiously, his weathered hands shaking. "Elena, my child," he said softly, "I am so deeply sorry. We should have questioned, should have investigated more thoroughly." "You believed what you were told," I replied gently. "Marcus was always convincing. That's how he got away with it for so long." Sophia stood up slowly, her wedding dress rustling as she faced Marcus. "You let me take over her charity," she said, her voice hollow with realization. "You let me speak at memorial events, honor her memory, while you knew—" "Sophia, please," Marcus begged, struggling against his restraints. "I love you. This doesn't change what we have." "You tried to murder another woman," she screamed, her composure finally breaking. "You stole money from homeless children. You let me fall in love with a killer." She ripped off her engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that had probably been paid for with stolen charity funds, and threw it at Marcus's feet. The ring skittered across the marble, coming to rest near my shoes. I bent down and picked it up, examining the stone in the cathedral's colored light. "Tiffany setting," I observed. "About $15,000 that could have fed 50 homeless families for a month." The ring made a satisfying clink as I dropped it into the collection plate near the altar. Detective Kowalski was reading Marcus his rights, his voice steady and professional despite the circus surrounding them. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Marcus was led away, he turned back one last time, his eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I saw not the charming man I'd fallen in love with, but the cold calculator who'd pushed me down those stairs. "This isn't over, Elena," he said quietly, his words meant for me alone. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my reconstructed face. "I started this the moment I survived your murder attempt. Everything that happens next is just the echo." The cathedral doors closed behind Marcus Chen, and I realized that the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. The media would descend like vultures, the legal proceedings would take months, and somewhere in the chaos of the last 6 months, I'd have to figure out who Elena Vasquez was now that she'd been reborn from the ashes of her own funeral. But as I stood in that cathedral, surrounded by the wreckage of Marcus's carefully constructed lies, I knew one thing for certain. The dead woman he tried to bury was gone forever. The woman standing in her place was someone else entirely, someone who had learned that the only thing more powerful than being mourned was returning to collect what was owed. The real story was just beginning. The media storm hit within hours. By the time I left the cathedral, news vans lined the street like predators circling wounded prey. Reporters thrust microphones toward my face, their voices blending into an incomprehensible chorus of questions that all boiled down to the same thing. "How does it feel to come back from the dead?" I said nothing, keeping my head down as Detective Kowalski escorted me through the crowd to his unmarked car. But my silence only fed their hunger. By evening, my story had become the lead on every major news network. The headlines wrote themselves: "Bride back from the dead crashes ex-fiancé's wedding," "Charity founder exposes murder plot at cathedral altar," "The Ghost in White," a real-life resurrection story. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since we left the cathedral. I'd turned it off hours ago, but the silence felt more ominous than the noise. In the safe house Detective Kowalski had arranged, a modest apartment in Queens that smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet, I sat staring at the muted television as my face flashed across the screen. Dr. Martinez knocked softly on the door before entering with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. "You need to eat," she said, settling the bags on the small dining table, "and probably drink." "I look terrible on camera," I said, watching a clip of myself walking down the cathedral aisle. The woman on screen looked confident, determined, righteously angry. I felt none of those things now, just exhausted. "You look like someone who survived attempted murder and spent 6 months planning the perfect revenge," Dr. Martinez replied, opening the wine. "Which is exactly what you are." She was right, but the victory felt hollow now that the adrenaline had faded. I'd spent so long focused on exposing Marcus that I hadn't considered what came after. Where did someone go when they'd already been dead for 6 months? "The district attorney wants to meet tomorrow," Dr. Martinez continued, settling into the chair across from me. Ada Jennifer Walsh, she's good. Prosecuted several high-profile fraud cases. She thinks they can get Marcus on attempted murder in the first degree. What about the others? I asked, picking at the lo mein without appetite. Richard Hawley, the board members who helped cover up the missing funds. Hawley's already trying to cut a deal. Apparently, he has information about other cases where Marcus falsified documents. As for the board, Dr. Martinez paused, choosing her words carefully. That's where things get complicated. I looked up from my untouched food. Complicated? How? 3 of Hope's Haven's board members are claiming they had no knowledge of the embezzlement. They're pointing fingers at each other, saying Marcus manipulated the financial reports. Without clear evidence of their complicity, they walk away. I finished, while homeless children continue to suffer because the charity's credibility is destroyed. It was the part of this mess that hurt most. Hope's Haven had been my life's work, built from nothing into an organization that provided shelter, meals, and education services to over 500 children annually. Now, the charity was front-page news for all the wrong reasons. Donors were withdrawing support, questioning whether their money had been stolen. Staff members were resigning rather than face the media scrutiny. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Despite my better judgment, I checked it. You destroyed everything we built together. Was your revenge worth killing innocent children's futures? He's texting me from jail, I said, showing Dr. Martinez the message. Her expression darkened. Marcus Chen doesn't get to play victim now. Block the number. But as I deleted the message, his words echoed in my mind. Had my quest for justice inadvertently harmed the very people I tried to help? The children who depended on Hope's Haven didn't care about embezzlement schemes or attempted murder. They just needed food and shelter. A sharp knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Detective Kowalski entered without waiting for permission, his face grim. "We have a problem," he announced. He grabbed the remote and unmuted the television. Marcus's new lawyer, a sleek woman named Victoria Sterling who specialized in defending white-collar criminals, stood behind a podium flanked by microphones. "My client maintains his complete innocence," Sterling was saying. Elena Vasquez's dramatic appearance today was nothing more than an elaborate hoax designed to destroy an innocent man's reputation. The so-called evidence has been fabricated by a woman with a documented history of mental instability. Mental instability. I nearly choked on my wine. Sterling continued. Miss Vasquez was treated for severe depression and anxiety following her parents' death 15 years ago. She's been obsessed with my client since their relationship ended, unable to accept that he'd moved on with another woman. This entire charade is the desperate act of a disturbed individual seeking attention. The camera cut to file footage of me from before the accident, climbing the steps of City Hall after a successful charity fundraiser, laughing at some forgotten joke. I looked young and naive, nothing like the harder woman I'd become. There, painting you as a stalker, Dr. Martinez observed, claiming you faked your own death to frame Marcus. But the medical records can be explained away as part of an elaborate hoax, Detective Kowalski said grimly. Sterling's good. She's already suggesting you paid Swiss doctors to falsify your injuries, that the security footage was digitally manipulated. On screen, Sterling was fielding questions from reporters. How do you explain the embezzlement charges? One asked. My client has never had access to Hope's Haven's financial accounts, Sterling replied smoothly. Any irregularities in the charity's books were the result of Ms. Vasquez's own mismanagement, which she's now attempting to blame on my client. I felt the room spinning. 6 months of careful planning, mountains of evidence, testimony from Dr. Martinez, and Marcus's lawyer was dismantling it all with practiced ease. She can't actually believe that defense will work, I said. She doesn't have to believe it, Detective Kowalski replied. She just has to create reasonable doubt, make you look unstable enough that a jury questions your credibility. My phone rang. Dr. Reyes calling from Switzerland. I let it go to voicemail, but minutes later it buzzed with a text. Reporters are at the clinic asking about your treatment. Should I speak with them? They're going after my medical records, I realized with growing horror. My therapy sessions, the psychiatric evaluations after the trauma. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Elena, listen to me. You underwent extensive psychological evaluation after your injuries. Every doctor who treated you documented that your mental state was stable, that your memories of the attack were clear and consistent. But Sterling will twist that, I said. She'll say the psychological treatment proves I was unstable, that my memories can't be trusted. The television switched to a new story, an interview with Sophia Winters. She sat in what looked like her parents' living room, still wearing her wedding dress but with her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. I don't know what to believe anymore, Sophia was saying, tears streaming down her face. Marcus grieved for Elena for months. He visited her grave every week. He donated money to children's charities in her memory. If this is all an act... The interviewer leaned forward sympathetically. What will you do now? I loved him, Sophia whispered. I thought I was helping him heal, if he really tried to murder someone, but if Elena faked all this... She broke down completely, unable to finish the sentence. I turned off the television, unable to watch anymore. The woman I thought was my replacement was just another victim of Marcus's manipulation. She genuinely believed she was helping a grieving man find love again, not realizing she was a prop in his elaborate cover-up. We need to change strategy, Detective Kowalski said. Sterling's forcing us to prove not just that Marcus committed these crimes, but that you're mentally competent to testify against him. How do we do that? We fight back with the truth. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every documented fact that proves your story, and we do it before Sterling can poison the jury pool any further. Dr. Martinez pulled out her laptop. I'll start compiling all your medical records from Switzerland, not just the physical injuries but the psychological evaluations, the cognitive tests, everything that proves your mental state was sound. What about the charity? I asked. While we're fighting this legal battle, Hope's Haven is bleeding donors and staff. One battle at a time, Detective Kowalski said. First, we make sure Marcus goes to prison, then we worry about rebuilding. But I was already thinking ahead, forming a plan that went beyond just punishing Marcus. If Sterling wanted to paint me as mentally unstable, I'd show the world exactly how stable and calculating I could be. I want to hold a press conference, I announced. Both of them stared at me. Elena, Dr. Martinez said carefully, that might not be wise. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Then I'll be very careful about what I say, I replied. But I won't let Marcus control the narrative from a jail cell. If he wants to play the victim, I'll remind everyone exactly who the real victim is. Detective Kowalski shook his head. Sterling will twist whatever you say. Let her try, I interrupted. I spent 6 months in Switzerland learning to walk again, to use my reconstructed hands, to speak clearly through facial injuries that should have killed me. You think I'm afraid of some lawyer's word games? The truth was, I was terrified. But fear had been my constant companion for 6 months, and I'd learned to function despite it. Tomorrow the world would see Elena Vasquez not as a victim or a vengeful ghost, but as a survivor who refused to be silenced. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time, instead of Marcus's manipulative guilt, the message was from someone unexpected. I worked for Hope's Haven before Marcus took over. I have records he thought were destroyed, ready to testify when you are. Jamie Chen, no relation. Then another message arrived from a different number. I was one of the kids your charity helped. Saw the news. Whatever you need to expose that bastard, I'm in. And another, former board member here. I was forced out when I questioned financial discrepancies, had emails that proved cover-up. Within an hour, my phone was flooded with messages of support. Former employees, families who'd been helped by the charity, whistleblowers who'd been silenced by Marcus's influence. The very people Sterling assumed would abandon me were rallying to my defense. Maybe I'm not as alone as Marcus hoped, I said, scrolling through the messages. Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time all day. Sterling made a mistake going public so aggressively. She's given your supporters a reason to come forward. Detective Kowalski was reading over my shoulder. Some of these people have evidence we didn't even know existed. If half of them testify, Marcus's defense collapses. I finished. He's not just fighting me anymore. He's fighting everyone he hurt along the way. But even as hope began to creep back in, I knew this was only the beginning. Sterling was too smart to rely on a single strategy, and Marcus was too desperate to go down without destroying everything in his path. The war for my resurrection had just begun, and I was about to learn that some fights require you to die a little more before you can truly live again. Tomorrow, I would face the cameras and tell my story. Tonight, I would prepare for the possibility that telling the truth might cost me everything I'd fought to reclaim. After all, the dead don't usually get second chances, and some people would do anything to keep them buried. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Meridian Hotel downtown, but I arrived 3 hours early to prepare. Ada Jennifer Walsh had insisted on reviewing my statement beforehand, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who spoke with the precision of someone who'd never lost a case she believed in. "Remember," she said as we sat in the hotel's business center, "Victoria Sterling will pick apart every word you say. Stick to facts, avoid emotional language, and whatever you do, don't let them bait you into appearing unstable." I nodded, adjusting the navy blue blazer I'd chosen for its professional appearance. Gone was yesterday's white dress. Today, I needed to look like a credible witness, not a vengeful ghost. "There's something else," Walsh continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Jamie Chen contacted our office this morning with additional evidence. What's in here? It changes everything." Inside the folder were photocopies of financial documents I'd never seen before. Emails with timestamps going back 5 years, and bank records showing transactions that made my discovery of Marcus's embezzlement look like the tip of an iceberg. Hope's Haven wasn't his first target, I breathed, scanning the documents. He's been doing this for years. 3 other charities in different states, Walsh confirmed. Always the same pattern. Charm his way into a relationship with someone connected to the organization, gain access to financial systems, then systematically drain funds while building a paper trail that would implicate his girlfriend if discovered. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The women before me, Sarah Chen in Portland, victim of a tragic car accident after discovering financial irregularities, Amanda Foster in Denver, who committed suicide when the charity she founded faced bankruptcy, Lisa Park in Chicago, who disappeared during a hiking trip after questioning missing funds. My hands shook as I flipped through police reports, obituaries, newspaper clippings. Each woman shared similarities with me and Sophia, successful, compassionate, involved in charitable work. Each had died or disappeared shortly after their organizations faced financial crisis. "How did Jamie get these documents?" I asked. "She's been investigating Marcus for 2 years, Walsh explained. Her sister was Sarah Chen. She never believed the car accident story and started tracking Marcus's pattern across the country. When she saw your story yesterday, she realized she finally had a living witness." The hotel's conference room was already filling with reporters when we arrived. Camera crews jostled for position while journalists checked their equipment and reviewed their notes. I recognized several faces from the morning news shows, their expressions mixing skepticism with anticipation. Victoria Sterling was there too, seated in the front row with a legal pad and a recorder. She looked impeccably professional in a charcoal gray suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. When our eyes met, she smiled. A predator's smile that said she was ready for battle. Detective Kowalski took the podium first, establishing the basic facts of the case. As he spoke, I watched the reporters' faces, trying to gauge their receptiveness. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared doubtful. A few seemed bored by the procedural details. Then it was my turn. 6 months ago, I began. My voice steady, despite my racing heart. I discovered that my fiancé had stolen over $3 million from the children's charity I founded. When I confronted him with evidence of his crimes, he attempted to murder me by pushing me down a flight of stairs. Sterling was already taking notes, probably cataloging my word choices for later attack. I continued anyway. What I didn't know at the time was that I was the 4th woman Marcus Chen had targeted in an identical scheme. I survived because of quick medical intervention and pure luck. 3 other women weren't so fortunate. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the story they'd expected. Sarah Chen, Amanda Foster, and Lisa Park were all charitable organization founders or board members who discovered financial irregularities connected to Marcus. All 3 died under suspicious circumstances before they could expose his crimes. I could see reporters frantically texting their editors, realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple murder attempt. Victoria Sterling's confident expression had shifted to barely concealed alarm. "The evidence connecting these cases spans 5 years in 4 states, I continued, nodding to Detective Kowalski, who began distributing copies of Jamie's documents to the press. Financial records show Marcus systematically targeted women in the nonprofit sector, used romantic relationships to gain access to organizational funds, then eliminated anyone who threatened to expose him. A reporter in the third row raised her hand. Miss Vasquez, how do you respond to allegations that you fabricated this evidence to frame Mr. Chen? I'd respond by asking why I would fabricate evidence implicating him in 3 other murders, I replied. The documents you're reviewing were compiled by Sarah Chen's sister, who's been investigating her death for years. The financial records come from banks in 3 different states. The timeline spans periods when I was in college or just starting my career, long before I ever met Marcus. Victoria Sterling stood up abruptly. This is clearly a coordinated attack on my client's character, she announced. These allegations are unsubstantiated. Then you won't mind if the FBI investigates them, I interrupted. Agent Patricia Reeves from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit is here today specifically to review the multi-state evidence. I hadn't known Agent Reeves was attending until Walsh mentioned it 10 minutes before we began, but the timing was perfect. Sterling's face went pale as a tall woman in a federal blazer stood up in the back of the room. The FBI will be conducting a full investigation into potential serial financial crimes and related homicides, Agent Reeves announced. We're treating this as a priority case given the evidence of interstate criminal activity. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, cameras were flashing, and Victoria Sterling was frantically typing on her phone, probably calling Marcus's more expensive lawyers. But I wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, I said, waiting for the noise to die down. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus didn't work alone. Richard Hawley, the lawyer who filed my fraudulent death certificate, has been involved in similar document falsifications in at least 2 other cases. Bank records show he received payments from shell companies controlled by Marcus after each woman's death. I pulled out another set of documents, ones Walsh had saved for maximum impact. Dr. Michael Ross, who signed Sarah Chen's autopsy report in Portland, received a $50,000 consulting fee from one of Marcus's companies 3 days after ruling her death accidental. Dr. Ross also happened to vacation in Denver during Amanda Foster's investigation and in Chicago when Lisa Park disappeared. The reporters were typing frantically now, understanding that they were witnessing the exposure of a sophisticated criminal network, not just one man's crimes. Detective Brian Walsh, no relation to Ada Walsh, was the lead investigator on Amanda Foster's case in Denver. He closed the investigation after only 3 days and received early retirement with full benefits 6 months later. His pension is managed by an investment firm owned by, I paused for effect, Richard Hawley. Victoria Sterling was gathering her papers, clearly preparing to leave, but Agent Reeves stepped forward to block her exit. Miss Sterling, the FBI agent said politely, I believe we'll need to speak with you as well. Our preliminary investigation shows your firm received payments from several companies that appear to be Marcus Chen fronts. We'd like to understand the nature of that attorney-client relationship. Sterling's composure finally cracked. This is outrageous, she sputtered. I've represented Mr. Chen for less than 24 hours. Any previous payments date back 3 years, Agent Reeves finished, including a substantial retainer paid immediately after Lisa Park's disappearance. We'll need to review all communications between your firm and Mr. Chen during that period. I watched Sterling's face cycle through emotions as she realized the trap she'd walked into. By aggressively defending Marcus and attacking my credibility, she'd drawn attention to her own involvement in his schemes. A reporter from the Times raised his hand. Miss Vasquez, if this criminal network is as extensive as you claim, how did you survive when 3 other women didn't? 2 reasons, I replied. First, Dr. Sarah Martinez next door was a trauma surgeon who recognized attempted murder when she saw it. She kept tissue samples and documented evidence before anyone could interfere. Second, Marcus got overconfident. He'd gotten away with murder 3 times. He stopped being careful. What's your goal now? Another reporter asked. What do you want to see happen? I thought about the women whose stories I'd read that morning, whose voices had been silenced by Marcus's violence. About the children who'd been denied help because their charitable funds had lined his pockets. About Sophia, manipulated into becoming an unwitting accomplice to his cover-up. Well, I want justice, I said simply. Not just for me, but for Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa. For every charity he robbed, every child he hurt, every person whose trust he betrayed. And I want to make sure he never has the opportunity to hurt anyone else. Agent Reeves stepped to the podium. The FBI will be coordinating with local authorities in Portland, Denver, and Chicago to reopen the investigations into Sarah Chen's, Amanda Foster's, and Lisa Park's deaths. We're also expanding our financial crimes investigation to include all individuals and organizations connected to this network. The questions continued for another hour, but the damage to Marcus's defense was already complete. Sterling had stopped taking notes and was instead making increasingly frantic phone calls. The reporters who'd seemed skeptical that morning were now treating me like a credible witness, rather than a potentially unstable victim. As the press conference ended, Detective Kowalski approached me with an update. "Marcus is requesting to speak with you," he said quietly. "Claims he has information that could help with the other cases." I almost laughed. He wants to make a deal. Probably. His new legal team, Sterling was replaced an hour ago, likely told him he's looking at multiple murder charges across 4 states, life in prison or the death penalty in states that still have it. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to face Marcus again, to see his reaction to the complete collapse of his elaborate schemes. But another part knew that whatever he wanted to tell me would be just another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. "Tell him I'll consider it," I said finally. "After the FBI finishes their investigation, after Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa get the justice they deserve, after every corrupt official and lawyer in his network is arrested, then maybe I'll listen to what he has to say." As I left the hotel, my phone was already buzzing with messages from supporters, interview requests from national news shows, and calls from other potential victims who'd recognized similar patterns in their own experiences with Marcus. The woman who'd walked into that cathedral yesterday had wanted to expose one man's crimes. The woman walking out of this press conference had accidentally uncovered something much larger, a network of corruption that had been operating in the shadows for years. Marcus Chen wasn't just a killer and embezzler. He was the center of a web that stretched across state lines and involved dozens of accomplices, and somehow, by refusing to stay dead, I'd given law enforcement the living witness they needed to bring down the entire operation. The resurrection was complete. Now came the reckoning. But as I walked toward Detective Kowalski's car, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. People who kill to protect secrets don't usually stop at one murder, and Marcus still had allies I hadn't identified yet. The web was unraveling, but some spiders bite when cornered. The safe house felt like a tomb. 3 days had passed since the press conference, and the FBI had moved me to a secure location in the Bronx after intercepting communication, suggesting Marcus's remaining network was planning to eliminate their problem witness. Agent Reeves had been blunt. "You've cost some very powerful people a lot of money and freedom. They want you gone." I sat at the kitchen table reviewing case files. My bodyguard, Agent Marcus Torres, ironically sharing my would-be killer's name, positioned by the window with clear sightlines to the street. The files spread before me contained the life stories of women I'd never met, but whose fates were now intertwined with mine. Sarah Chen had been a pediatric nurse who'd founded a children's medical charity in Portland. The photo showed a laughing woman with kind eyes surrounded by sick children she'd helped. Her accident had occurred 2 weeks after she discovered discrepancies in the charity's medical equipment purchases, equipment that had never been delivered. Amanda Foster's file was thicker. A former teacher who'd created an after-school program for disadvantaged kids in Denver. She'd been found dead in her apartment with a suicide note that handwriting experts now suspected was forged. The note confessed to embezzling funds that had actually been stolen by Marcus through falsified vendor invoices. Lisa Park's case was the most disturbing. A former social worker who'd started a women's shelter in Chicago. She disappeared during what was supposed to be a solo camping trip. Her body had never been found, but credit card records showed someone, presumably Marcus, had used her cards for weeks after her disappearance to maintain the illusion she was still alive. Each of them discovered his theft within days of their deaths, I murmured, connecting the timeline patterns with red string on the improvised evidence board Agent Torres had helped me construct. And each of them had isolated themselves by questioning the finances, Torres observed, joining me at the table. He probably encouraged them to investigate quietly, made them think they were protecting the organization by not involving authorities, just like he'd done with me. Marcus had been sympathetic when I'd first noticed the irregularities, suggesting we handle it internally to avoid damaging Hope's Haven's reputation. He'd even offered to help investigate, probably to monitor how close I was getting to the truth. My secure phone rang. Agent Reeves calling with an update. We've made 3 more arrests, she announced without preamble. Dr. Michael Ross in Portland is being charged with falsifying autopsy reports and evidence tampering. Detective Brian Walsh in Denver is facing corruption charges and conspiracy to commit murder. And we picked up Judge Patricia Monroe in Chicago. Turns out she fast-tracked the closure of Lisa Parks' estate and sealed the investigation files. A judge? I sank into my chair, realizing the corruption went even higher than I'd imagined. Marcus was very thorough in building his network, Reeves continued. Monroe received substantial campaign contributions from shell companies he controlled. In exchange, she made sure Lisa Parks' case was buried and her assets were transferred to Marcus through a fraudulent will. The implications were staggering. Marcus hadn't just killed these women, he'd systematically erased them, stealing not only their lives but their legacies. Their charities had been shut down or absorbed by other organizations, their work forgotten, their impact on the world diminished to protect his crimes. There's something else, Reeves said, her tone growing more serious. We intercepted a phone call between Richard Hawley and someone we haven't identified yet. They're planning something for tonight. Agent Torres was already moving, checking his weapon and radio. Time to move? He asked. Not yet, Reeves replied through the phone speaker. We want to catch them in the act. Elena, I need you to understand what they're planning isn't just another attempt on your life. They want to stage it as a suicide, complete with a confession note admitting to fabricating evidence against Marcus. The room felt like it was spinning. Even from his jail cell, Marcus was orchestrating my destruction, trying to transform me from victim to villain in the public narrative. If they succeeded, he'd be released as the victim of a vindictive ex-fiancé's elaborate revenge fantasy. I won't hide anymore, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Set the trap. Use me as bait. Absolutely not, Torres interjected. That's not how witness protection works. But Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Actually, she said slowly, it might be our best option. If we can catch them attempting to murder Elena, we'll have the evidence we need to connect the entire network. Are you seriously considering this? Torres demanded. I'm considering ending this, I replied. 3 women are dead because they trusted the system to protect them. Sarah reported her suspicions to the charity board, who ignored her. Amanda told her boyfriend about the missing funds. He was working with Marcus. Lisa confided in her lawyer, who sold her out. I won't make their mistakes. Agent Reeves's voice crackled through the phone. Elena, if we do this, it has to be completely controlled. Multiple surveillance teams, backup agents, and you wear a wire that broadcasts everything live to our command center. What exactly are they planning? I asked. The intercepted call mentioned making it look like you couldn't handle the pressure of lying about Marcus. That guilt drove you to confess and commit suicide. They have a forged note ready that admits to fabricating all the evidence. The audacity was breathtaking. Even facing multiple murder charges, Marcus was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still convinced he could lie and charm his way out of consequences. How would they stage it? Torres asked reluctantly. Overdose, probably, Reeves replied. Same method they used with Amanda Foster, pills that would be consistent with someone suffering from depression and guilt. I thought about Sophia, still dealing with the media aftermath of our destroyed wedding, trying to rebuild her life after learning she'd been manipulated by a serial killer. If Marcus's network succeeded in discrediting me, she'd be painted as another victim of my alleged vindictive lies. Set it up, I decided. But I want guarantees. If something goes wrong, if they somehow succeed in killing me, the evidence against Marcus and his network goes public immediately. All of it. Elena, Torres started. Agent Torres, I interrupted. 3 women trusted the system and died. I'd rather die fighting than hiding. The plan came together quickly. Agent Reeves's team would stage my apparent return to my old apartment, the scene of Marcus's attempted murder, making it look like I was breaking FBI protection to retrieve personal items. The building would be surrounded by federal agents, but their presence would be concealed. I would wear a wire that transmitted directly to the command center, and sharpshooters would have clear sight lines from adjacent buildings. As evening approached, I found myself staring at my reflection in the safe house bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was a far cry from the naive charity founder who'd fallen in love with Marcus Chen 2 years ago. The physical reconstruction had changed my appearance, but the deeper transformation was internal. I'd become someone harder, more calculating, willing to risk everything for justice. Dr. Martinez arrived an hour before the operation to check my medical readiness. "Your heart rate is elevated but stable," she reported after examining me. "Elena, you don't have to do this. There are other ways to catch them." "Not ways that guarantee they can't hurt anyone else," I replied. "If this network has been operating for 5 years, how many other women have they targeted? How many more will they kill if we don't stop them completely?" She squeezed my hand gently. "Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa would be proud of you." The wire was surprisingly small, a nearly invisible device that clipped inside my shirt collar, transmitting everything to receivers positioned around the building. Agent Torres reviewed the safety protocols one final time. If I said the code phrase, "I need air," the tactical team would storm the building immediately. "Remember," Agent Reeves said as we prepared to leave, "they want this to look like suicide, which means they'll try to get you to ingest something voluntarily. Play along until we can identify everyone involved. Then give us the signal." The drive to my old apartment felt surreal. Streets I'd walked every day for 3 years now seemed foreign, like returning to a life that had belonged to someone else. The building looked the same from the outside, but I knew every window contained federal agents. Every parked car held surveillance equipment. Agent Torres stayed in the car, maintaining radio contact as I approached the building's entrance. The lobby was empty, except for Mrs. Patterson, the elderly night doorman who'd worked there since I moved in. "Miss Elena," she exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "We thought you were... Everyone said you had died." "Hello, Mrs. Patterson," I said softly, hoping the microphone picked up our conversation. "I need to get some things from my apartment." She handed me a spare key with shaking hands. The police sealed it for months. Then that lawyer came and took boxes of things. Said he was handling your estate. Richard Hawley had been in my apartment, probably removing evidence and planting materials to support the eventual suicide narrative. The thought of him touching my personal belongings, contaminating my private space, made my skin crawl. The elevator to the 14th floor felt like ascending to my own execution. Each floor that passed brought me closer to the place where Marcus had tried to kill me, where his associates now planned to finish the job. My apartment door was marked with remnants of police tape, but the locks had been changed. The spare key worked, confirming that someone had been preparing for my arrival. Inside, everything looked almost exactly as I'd left it 6 months ago, except cleaner, as if someone had staged it for photographs. The living room where Marcus and I had argued looked peaceful in the evening light. The hardwood floors had been refinished, erasing the bloodstains from my fall. Even the banister I'd struck had been repaired and polished. It was a crime scene sanitized to look like a normal home. "Elena," a voice called from the kitchen, female, vaguely familiar. I walked toward the sound, my heart racing despite the knowledge that federal agents were positioned throughout the building. In the kitchen stood a woman I recognized but had never met, Dr. Patricia Monroe, the corrupt judge from Chicago who'd helped cover up Lisa Park's murder. "Judge Monroe," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Please call me Patricia," she replied with a warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been so worried about you since that terrible press conference. The stress you must be under, the guilt from fabricating all those lies about poor Marcus." She was setting the narrative immediately, speaking for the wire recording. Behind her on the kitchen counter, I could see a bottle of wine and what appeared to be medication bottles. "I didn't fabricate anything," I said clearly, making sure the microphone captured every word. "Of course you did, dear," Patricia replied gently, moving toward the wine bottle. "Marcus explained everything to us. How you've been mentally unstable since your parents' death. How you blamed him for your charity's financial problems. How you staged this elaborate revenge fantasy." She poured 2 glasses of wine, her movements deliberate and practiced. "The guilt must be overwhelming now that innocent people are being arrested because of your lies." The wine was undoubtedly drugged, probably with the same cocktail they used to kill Amanda Foster. Patricia was playing the role of concerned friend, offering comfort to a distraught woman on the verge of breakdown. "Who else is involved, Patricia?" I asked, accepting the wine glass but not drinking. "How many people has Marcus recruited to help him murder women?" Her mask slipped slightly. "No one was murdered, Elena. 3 tragic deaths." "Yes, but Sarah Chen's autopsy showed blunt force trauma inconsistent with a car accident," I interrupted. Amanda Foster had defensive wounds on her hands before she allegedly took those pills. Lisa Park's body was never found because you helped Marcus dispose of it. Patricia's friendly demeanor was evaporating. You're unwell, dear. The stress has made you paranoid, delusional. That's why we're here to help. We? Heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Richard Hawley appeared in the kitchen doorway. Behind him was a man I didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Miss Vasquez, Hawley said formally, I represent several parties who've been damaged by your false accusations. We're prepared to offer you a way out of this situation that avoids criminal charges. The unnamed man said nothing, but his presence was clearly meant to be intimidating. This was the muscle of the operation, probably the one who'd actually carried out the murders while others provided legal and medical cover. What kind of way out? I asked, still holding the untouched wine glass. Patricia stepped closer. You drink the wine, take the pills we've prepared, and write a simple note confessing to your lies. We make sure your death is peaceful, and in return the investigation into Marcus stops. Everyone goes home. And if I refuse? The unnamed man spoke for the first time, his voice cold and emotionless. Then your death becomes much less peaceful. I looked around the kitchen. My kitchen, where I'd cooked meals for Marcus, where we'd planned our future together, where I'd naively believed I was building a life with someone who loved me. Now it was about to become my tomb, unless the FBI was ready to move. Before I decide, I said carefully, I need to understand something. How many women has Marcus killed? Just Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa, or were there others? Patricia and Hawley exchanged glances. Those are the only ones that matter, Hawley said. That's not what I asked. The unnamed man stepped forward. Enough questions. Drink the wine. I raised the glass to my lips, then paused. I need air, I said clearly. The effect was instantaneous. The kitchen window exploded inward as tactical team members crashed through. The front door splintered as agents poured into the apartment. Red laser sights danced across the walls as sharpshooters took position. FBI, nobody move. Patricia dropped her wine glass, the crystal shattering on the kitchen floor. Hawley raised his hands immediately, but the unnamed man reached for something inside his jacket. Gun! Someone shouted. The next few seconds felt like hours. The man's weapon cleared his holster just as Agent Torres appeared behind him, taser drawn. Electricity crackled through the air, and the would-be killer collapsed, his gun skittering across the floor. Elena, are you hurt? Torres demanded, checking me for injuries while other agents secured the scene. I'm fine, I replied, though my hands were shaking uncontrollably now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Did you get everything on tape? Agent Reeves's voice crackled through Torres's radio. Every word. We have enough to charge all three with conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, and attempted homicide. As Patricia Monroe was handcuffed, she looked at me with undisguised hatred. You have no idea what you've destroyed, she hissed. This was bigger than just Marcus, bigger than you can understand. Then you'd better start talking, I replied, because I have a very good imagination. The unnamed man, who Agent Reeves later identified as Vincent Marsh, a former military contractor with a history of violence, said nothing as he was arrested, but the phone records seized from his apartment would eventually reveal a network of corruption spanning 7 states and involving dozens of officials. Standing in my kitchen as crime scene technicians photographed evidence and agents processed the arrests, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced in 6 months: closure. Not just for myself, but for Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa, women whose voices had been silenced but whose stories had finally been heard. Marcus's web hadn't just unraveled, it had been completely destroyed. Every corrupt official, every complicit accomplice, every person who'd profited from murder was now facing federal charges. But as I watched Patricia Monroe being led away in handcuffs, her words echoed in my mind. This was bigger than just Marcus. Bigger than you can understand. The investigation was far from over, and somewhere in the shadows, other predators were probably watching, learning from Marcus's mistakes, preparing to adapt their methods. The dead don't usually get justice. Tonight they had. But I was beginning to understand that some fights never truly end. They just evolve into new battles against different monsters. The hunt was far from over. It was just beginning. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity as I took the witness stand for the final day of Marcus Chen's trial. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice for Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa, women who'd become symbols of a larger fight against corruption and violence. Their families sat in the front row, finally getting the day in court their daughters had been denied. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh approached the witness stand with the confidence of someone who'd spent months building an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, recorded confessions, testimony from dozens of witnesses, and the dramatic arrest footage from my apartment that had been viewed millions of times online. "Miss Vasquez," Walsh began, "when you walked into St. Augustine's Cathedral 3 months ago, did you expect to uncover a criminal network spanning 7 states?" "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching me. "I just wanted to stop one man from getting away with attempted murder. I never imagined the scope of what we'd discover." Marcus sat at the defense table, flanked by his third set of lawyers. The first 2 had abandoned him when the FBI evidence became public. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by months in federal custody and the weight of overwhelming evidence. Gone was the charming confidence that had once made me believe I was lucky to be loved by him. His new lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named James Morton, had tried valiantly to salvage something from the wreckage. But when your client's crimes include serial murder, embezzlement across multiple states, and conspiracy charges involving judges and law enforcement, there's little room for legal maneuvering. "The defense has suggested you fabricated evidence out of revenge," Walsh continued. "How do you respond to that allegation?" I looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the trial began. Revenge would have been exposing his crimes and walking away. Justice is making sure he can never hurt anyone again, and that everyone who helped him faces consequences. The trial had revealed horrors beyond even my worst fears. Vincent Marsh, the hitman who tried to kill me, had confessed to 12 murders across 15 years. Not just the 3 women connected to Marcus, but other victims in different schemes. Judge Patricia Monroe had been taking bribes for over a decade, corrupting cases involving domestic violence and financial crimes. Richard Hawley's law firm had been a money laundering operation disguised as estate planning. But the most shocking revelation had come from Dr. Michael Ross, the coroner who'd falsified autopsy reports. Under interrogation, he'd admitted to covering up murders in 6 different cities, working with various criminal networks to hide evidence of homicides. Marcus's operation had been just one tentacle of a larger conspiracy that treated human life as a business expense. "Ms. Vasquez," the defense attorney said when it was his turn to cross-examine, "isn't it true that you've profited significantly from this experience? Book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements." I'd been expecting this line of attack. "The proceeds from any media deals go directly to a victims' rights foundation I've established," I replied. "Not a penny goes to me personally, and I'd trade every dollar to have Sarah, Amanda, and Lisa still alive." In the gallery, I could see Jamie Chen, Sarah's sister, wiping away tears. She'd become a close friend over the past months, helping me navigate the complexities of survivors' guilt while fighting for justice for all the victims. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Walsh methodically laid out the timeline of Marcus's crimes, the systematic targeting of charitable women, the network of corruption that enabled his murders. She showed photos of all 12 victims, reminding the jury that this wasn't about financial crimes. It was about lives destroyed by greed and violence. Marcus Chen didn't just steal money, Walsh concluded. He stole futures. He stole the good these women would have done in the world. He stole children's chances at better lives. And when these women threatened to expose him, he stole their lives entirely. The defense's closing was brief and half-hearted. Morton argued for mercy, suggesting that Marcus had been manipulated by the larger criminal network. But the evidence was too clear, the victims' voices too loud, the pattern too undeniable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Marcus's mother wept in the back row. She'd stood by him through the financial crimes but abandoned him when the murder evidence became public. Sophia Winters, who testified about Marcus's manipulation and deception, sat quietly with tears streaming down her face. As Marcus was led away in shackles, he turned back once more. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and for a moment, I saw not the monster who tried to kill me, but the broken man who'd convinced himself that other people's lives were less valuable than his comfort. Judge Rebecca Hassan addressed the court before sentencing. "Mr. Chen," You have been found guilty of 12 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 7 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of embezzlement, and conspiracy charges in a criminal enterprise. The scope of your crimes is staggering, the callousness breathtaking." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "You targeted women who dedicated their lives to helping others. You exploited their compassion, betrayed their trust, and when they threatened your schemes, you had them killed. There is no rehabilitation for what you've done, no redemption that can restore the lives you've taken. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each murder count, to be served consecutively. Additionally, you will serve 25 years for each conspiracy and embezzlement charge. You will never leave federal prison." The gavel fell with finality. Marcus Chen, who'd once bragged about his power and influence, would spend the rest of his life in a concrete cell. But the trials weren't over. Vincent Marsh had already been sentenced to death in 3 different states. Judge Patricia Monroe faced 40 years for corruption and conspiracy. Richard Hawley was serving 25 years for money laundering and accessory to murder. Dr. Michael Ross had been given life in prison for falsifying evidence in dozens of murder cases. The ripple effects continued spreading. The FBI investigation had uncovered similar networks in 12 other cities, leading to over 100 arrests. Charitable organizations nationwide had implemented new oversight procedures. Legislation had been passed requiring federal monitoring of large nonprofit financial transactions. 6 months later, I stood before the newly constructed memorial in Riverside Park, watching families of the victims place flowers at the base of the granite monument. 12 names were etched into the stone, with Sarah Chen, Amanda Foster, and Lisa Park prominently featured alongside the other women whose murders had been covered up by the network. Hope's Haven had been rebuilt from the ground up. The board was now comprised entirely of child advocates and financial oversight experts. Donations had actually increased as the public rallied around the organization that had been victimized by Marcus's crimes. We'd opened 3 new facilities and expanded services to over 800 children. "Elena." A voice behind me belonged to Sophia Winters. She approached hesitantly, still carrying the weight of having been engaged to a serial killer. "Sophia," I replied warmly. "How are you adjusting?" She'd moved across the country after the trial, changing her name and starting fresh as a teacher in Oregon. The media attention had been brutal for months, but she'd handled it with more grace than anyone expected. "Better," she said quietly. "I've been working with a therapist who specializes in victims of manipulation. She says the guilt I feel about not seeing the signs is normal but misplaced." "You were a victim too," I reminded her. Marcus was an expert at making people see what he wanted them to see. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching children play in the distance, children who were alive and safe because the network that had threatened them was gone. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't survived?" Sophia asked. I considered the question carefully. "He would have killed again," I said finally, "and again until someone else was strong enough or lucky enough to stop him. But it was you," she said. "You were the one strong enough." That night, I sat in my new apartment, a penthouse with security systems and clear sight lines, nothing like the place where Marcus had tried to kill me. My phone rang with the weekly check-in from Agent Reeves. "Any developments?" I asked. 3 more cities have requested FBI assistance with cold cases involving missing charitable workers, she reported. The investigation keeps expanding. We estimate Marcus's network may have been connected to over 30 murders nationwide. The scope was still growing. Each arrest led to new evidence, new victims, new connections to other criminal enterprises. Marcus hadn't just been a killer, he'd been part of an ecosystem that treated violence as a business model. "What about the civil suits?" I asked. 17 families have filed wrongful death suits against the various institutions that enabled the network. The payouts will be substantial, though no amount of money can truly compensate for what was lost. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and began working on the Victims' Rights Foundation's annual report. We provided assistance to over 200 families affected by violent crimes, funded legal advocacy for dozens of cases, and established scholarship programs in each victim's name. The Sarah Chen Scholarship supported nursing students who planned to work with disadvantaged children. Amanda Foster's program funded teachers working in underserved communities. Lisa Parks Foundation helped women leaving abusive relationships start their own businesses. Each scholarship recipient represented the good that could grow from terrible tragedy, the lives that could be saved because others had been lost. 1 year later, the anniversary of my resurrection was marked not with celebrations but with quiet reflection. I'd established a tradition of visiting the memorial every year on the date I'd walked into that cathedral, bringing fresh flowers and spending time remembering the women whose voices had been silenced. This year, I wasn't alone. Jamie Chen had flown in from Portland, bringing her teenage daughter, who'd never met her Aunt Sarah but had grown up hearing stories of her compassion. Other families had made similar pilgrimages, creating an informal support network of people connected by tragedy but united in their determination to prevent future victims. As the sun set over the memorial, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, my blood ran cold. Old habits from the dangerous months died hard. But the message was from a young woman named Maria Santos. "Miss Vasquez, I'm a social worker in Phoenix. I think I've identified a pattern similar to what happened with Marcus Chen. Can we talk?" I smiled, typing back immediately. "Of course. Let me connect you with Agent Reeves and our legal team. You're not alone." The fight wasn't over. It would never be completely over. But each time someone recognized the warning signs, each time a potential victim trusted their instincts, each time justice was served, the world became a little safer. Standing at the memorial as darkness fell, I thought about the woman who died on those stairs 6 months before my wedding. Elena Vasquez, the naive charity founder who'd believed love could conquer all, was gone forever. The woman who'd risen from her ashes was something different, scarred but stronger, suspicious but not cynical, determined to ensure that other women wouldn't have to die for justice to be served. I was no longer the victim of Marcus Chen's violence. I was the guardian of the promise I'd made to Sarah, Amanda, Lisa, and all the others. Their deaths would not be in vain. Their stories would not be forgotten, and their killers would never stop paying for what they'd done. As I walked away from the memorial, my phone was already ringing with calls from investigators, journalists, and advocates. The work continued, the fight evolved, and somewhere in the darkness, justice was preparing to catch the next predator who thought human life was disposable. The dead had spoken through my voice. Now the living would carry their message forward, and I would make sure it was heard. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.